For centuries, Zen Buddhism has offered a path to inner stillness, not through complicated practices or rigid discipline, but through learning to rest with what is, rather than struggling with what might be. Tonight we will explore these profound teachings through stories and insights that have guided countless people to peace. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The wisdom you'll encounter tonight isn't difficult to understand. They are truths about being human that speak directly to something you already know deep down. Each teaching, each story is just a reminder of the peace that's been here all along, waiting beneath the surface of your busy thoughts. Let this ancient wisdom wash over you like gentle rain, dissolving what needs to dissolve, settling where it needs to settle. Let your body sink deeper into whatever supports you. There's nowhere else you need to be right now. Relax, take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. One of the most freeing discoveries in Zen Buddhism is learning when to stop interfering. We spend so much energy trying to force things into the shape we think they should take. We push and pull at life, trying to make it cooperate with our plans. We have ideas about how things should go, and when reality doesn't match those ideas, we struggle. But Zen teaching suggests something different. Sometimes the wisest action is no action at all. Sometimes our constant doing creates more tangles than it unravels. This doesn't mean giving up or becoming passive. It doesn't mean we stop caring or never take action. It means learning to recognize when our interference creates more problems than it solves. It means understanding the difference between helpful effort and useless struggling. It means knowing when to act and when to allow. Think of a river flowing around rocks. The water doesn't fight the obstacles in its path. It doesn't try to move the rocks or complain about their presence. It doesn't stop and say, "This rock shouldn't be here." It simply flows around them, finding the path of least resistance. And eventually, given enough time, the gentle flow of water shapes even the hardest stone. Not through force, through patient allowing. Zen Buddhism calls this wui, effortless action. Action that arises naturally from the situation rather than being forced by our will. It's not laziness. It's not doing nothing. It's doing exactly what's needed without adding unnecessary effort on top. It's the bamboo that bends in the storm instead of breaking. It's the skilled craftsman whose hands move without thinking. It's the cook who knows just when to stir the pot and when to leave it alone. It's the moment when everything flows and nothing feels like struggle. This is what Zen Buddhism points us toward. There was a master named Sangai who lived in a monastery on a hillside. The monastery was surrounded by groves of bamboo that swayed and rustled in every breeze. The sound of bamboo moving in the wind was constant, a gentle whisper that filled the grounds. Sangai had a student named Tenshin who came to study with him. Tenshin was earnest and dedicated, but he approached everything with tremendous effort. When he meditated, his back was rigid as stone. His shoulders were tense, his jaw was tight. He would sit with his face strained, forcing himself to concentrate, willing his mind to be still. After meditation, other students would rise and move naturally to their tasks, but Tenshin would stand slowly, clearly exhausted from the effort of sitting. He treated meditation like a battle he had to win. One autumn afternoon, the weather changed suddenly. Dark clouds rolled in from the east. The wind picked up, first in gentle gusts, then building to something stronger. By evening, a full storm had arrived. Rain lashed against the monastery walls. The wind howled through the eaves. Tenshin was in his small room when he heard a tremendous creaking and cracking sound. He rushed to the window and looked out into the wild weather. His heart sank. The bamboo grove was being torn apart by the wind. The tall stalks were bending so far he could see their tops touching the ground. They whipped back and forth violently. He was certain they would snap. He ran through the monastery halls looking for Master Sangai. He found him in the meditation hall, sitting calmly despite the storm raging outside. "Master," Tenshin said breathlessly, "the wind is destroying the bamboo grove. The stalks are bending to the ground. We must do something. Should we try to stake them? Should we tie them together?" Sengai rose slowly and walked to the large window that overlooked the hillside. He stood there quietly, watching the storm. Tenshin stood beside him, anxious and agitated. "What do you see?" Sengai finally asked. "I see the bamboo being destroyed. The wind is too strong. They're bending so far. They'll surely break. Look more carefully," Sengai said. His voice was calm, barely audible above the storm. Tenshin looked again. The bamboo stalks were indeed bending deeply with each powerful gust. Their tops swept down until they nearly touched the earth. The whole grove moved like waves on an ocean, green stalks flowing with the wind's force. It looked violent, it looked destructive. But as he watched more carefully, he began to notice something. When each gust passed, the bamboo sprang back upright. Again and again, they bent deeply and then returned. They moved with the wind rather than against it. His eyes shifted to the pine trees that grew among the bamboo. These trees stood rigid against the wind. They didn't bend like the bamboo. And as he watched, he heard a sharp crack. A large branch tore away from one of the pines and crashed to the ground. Another pine was splitting down its trunk. The bamboo, for all its dramatic bending, remained unharmed. Not a single stalk had broken. "The bamboo knows how to survive the storm," Sengai said quietly. "It doesn't fight the wind. It doesn't try to stand rigid against something more powerful than itself. It moves with the wind, bends with it, allows it to pass, and then it returns to its natural position." Tenshin stood in silence, watching the bamboo dance in the storm. "The pine trees are strong," Sengai continued, "but their strength is rigid. They try to resist the wind with force, and so they break. The bamboo is flexible. It has a different kind of strength, the strength that comes from yielding." They stood together, watching until the storm began to ease. As the wind calmed, the bamboo's movement became gentler. Soon they were just swaying softly, the way they always did. Not one had been damaged. That night, Tenshin couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the bamboo and the pine trees. He thought about his own meditation practice, how rigid he held himself, how much force he used trying to make his mind behave, how exhausted he felt after sitting as if he'd been fighting a battle. The next morning, during meditation, he tried something different. Instead of holding himself rigid, he allowed his body to find its natural position. Instead of forcing his attention to stay fixed on his breath, he let his attention move naturally, like bamboo bending in wind. When thoughts came, he didn't fight them. He let them pass through. He expected this softer approach to make his meditation worse. But something surprising happened. Without all his rigid effort, his body began to relax on its own. His breath settled into a natural rhythm. His mind, no longer being forced into stillness, started to quiet naturally. He realized he had been creating most of his struggle. The harder he tried to force stillness, the more tension he created. The more he fought with his thoughts, the more turbulent they became. He was like a pine tree trying to stand rigid against the wind of his own mind. After the meditation ended, he found Master Sengai in the garden. "Clear as throat, Master," he said. "I think I understand now. My rigid effort in meditation was like trying to stand stiff against the wind. I was creating the very struggle I was trying to overcome." Sengai smiled. "And what did you discover this morning?" "That when I stopped forcing, things settled naturally, like the bamboo returning to its position after the wind passes." "Yes," Sengai said, "this is what Zen Buddhism teaches. We think we need to control everything through force, but often our interference creates more disturbance than the original problem. Learning when to bend, when to allow, when to let things be. This is wisdom. This teaching about letting things be runs deep in Zen Buddhism. It touches everything: how we sit in meditation, how we approach our work, how we meet difficulties, how we rest at night." We often create our own suffering by refusing to accept what is. Something happens that we don't like, and instead of acknowledging it and working with it, we spend our energy fighting against the reality of it. We argue with what has already occurred. We insist things should be different. We create an internal war with circumstances we cannot change. A traveler comes to a stream and finds the bridge washed away. He can stand on the bank and be angry that the bridge is gone. He can curse the storm that destroyed it. He can insist that there should be a bridge. He can spend hours in frustration about the unfairness of it all. Or he can accept that there is no bridge and find another way across. One response creates suffering, the other creates solutions. The bridge is gone either way. His anger doesn't rebuild it. His insistence doesn't change the situation, but his acceptance allows him to see what's actually possible. This is what Zen Buddhism helps us understand. We waste tremendous energy fighting with reality, and this fight doesn't change what's already happened. It only adds our suffering to the situation. In a small village at the base of a mountain, there lived a tea master named Riku. His name was known throughout the region for his skill in the tea ceremony, but more than his skill, people spoke of his remarkable calm. Nothing seemed to disturb him. Students came from far away to learn his secret. Riku lived in a simple house with a tea room built according to traditional design. The room was small and spare, with clean lines and careful attention to every detail. The tatami mats on the floor were woven perfectly. Each tea bowl in his collection had been chosen with great care. The scroll hanging in the alcove changed with the seasons. He had spent years perfecting his practice. Every movement in the tea ceremony had meaning. The way he folded the cloth, the angle at which he placed the scoop, the sound of water being poured. Nothing was random. Everything flowed with purpose. One afternoon in late spring, Riku was preparing for an important ceremony. The local lord was coming to take tea along with several distinguished guests. This was a great honor. Riku had been preparing for days. He rose before dawn that morning. He cleaned the tea room until every surface gleamed. He arranged flowers in the alcove, choosing a single branch of plum blossom that spoke of simplicity and grace. He selected the perfect tea bowl for the season, one with a glaze that reminded him of spring rain. He laid out the utensils in their proper places, the bamboo scoop, the silk cloth, the ironed kettle, each item positioned exactly. He heated the water to the precise temperature, listening to the sound it made as it approached the perfect moment. The sound was called Wind in the Pines by tea masters, and Riku could hear when it was just right. His students helped with the preparations. They had swept the garden path. They had prepared the waiting area. Everything was ready. The ceremony would begin at the hour of the horse, when the sun reached its height. Riku stood in the tea room one final time before the guests arrived, checking that all was in order. Years of practice, decades of refinement. This ceremony would unfold with the precision and grace that made his tea gatherings famous. Then he heard the sound of running feet. Quick, panicked steps on the wooden floor outside. One of his youngest students, a boy named Jiro, burst into the tea room. He was carrying a bucket of fresh water from the well. This water was needed for rinsing the tea bowls during the ceremony, but Jiro was moving too fast, not paying attention. His foot caught on the threshold. Time seemed to slow. Riku watched as the boy stumbled forward. The bucket tipped. Water poured out in a great wave, splashing across the pristine tatami mats. The other students gasped. Jiro fell to his knees, trying uselessly to catch the water with his hands. But it was already spreading, soaking into the carefully woven mats, pooling around the edges of the room. The bottom of the scroll was wet. Several of the carefully arranged utensils were knocked aside by the flood. The students froze, horrified. They looked at Riku, waiting for his anger. All his work, all his careful preparation, hours of effort ruined in an instant. The ceremony would have to be postponed. The mats would take days to dry properly. The Lord and his guests were already on their way. There was no time to fix this. The boy had destroyed everything. But Riku simply set down the tea bowl he was holding. He looked at the spreading water for a long moment. His face showed no anger, no frustration, no disturbance. "Well," he said quietly, his voice calm, "we needed to clean these mats anyway. They were getting old." He rolled up his sleeves and knelt down. He began to move the wet mats, gently shifting them so they could be taken outside to dry. The other students stood motionless, unsure what to do. "Don't just stand there," Riku said, but his tone was kind. "Help me move these, and someone should go to meet the Lord's party on the path. Explain that the ceremony must be rescheduled. Be respectful. Apologize for the inconvenience." The students sprang into action following his calm direction. Within minutes, the wet mats were outside in the Sunday. Fresh mats were being brought from storage. Riku was already planning a simpler ceremony, one that could be performed in another room. Jiro remained kneeling where he had fallen, tears streaming down his face. "Master, I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything. Please forgive me." Riku came and sat beside the boy. "You spilled water," he said simply. "Water spills, accidents happen. This is part of life. But all your work, the work wasn't ruined," Riku said. "The situation changed. Being upset wouldn't dry the mats or bring the ceremony back. It would only add my suffering to the problem that already exists. The water spilled. That's what happened. Fighting with what already happened is like arguing with the rain that's already fallen." Later that evening, after the Lord had been notified and new arrangements had been made, one of the senior students approached Riku. "Master, I must ask, weren't you upset even a little? All your preparation undone in a moment?" Riku smiled. "Feelings arose," he said. "Disappointment came. I felt it in my body, a sinking sensation. That's natural. But I didn't feed it. I didn't build a story around it. I didn't start thinking about how unfair it was or how this shouldn't have happened. I felt the feeling, and then I dealt with the situation." "But how do you not build the story?" "Practice," Riku said, "and understanding. This is what Zen Buddhism teaches us. We can't always control what happens, but we can choose whether to struggle against it." The water was already spilled. No amount of anger would unspill it. So why add anger to the situation? Why make one problem into two? The student nodded slowly. "So you just accept whatever happens?" "I accept what has already happened." Riku clarified, "I don't fight with the past. But from that acceptance, I can respond skillfully to what needs to be done now. If I'm busy being angry about spilled water, I can't clearly see what should happen next." Acceptance isn't about giving up. It's about seeing clearly without the distortion of my resistance. He paused, looking out at the garden where the wet mats were drying in the late Sunday. "Besides," he added, "Yuro learned something today about attention and care that no amount of teaching could have shown him. And I was reminded that perfection is an illusion. The most beautiful ceremonies often come from moments when plans fall apart, and we must respond with presence rather than preparation. This practice of accepting what is doesn't mean we never take action. It doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. It means we act from clarity rather than from resistance. When we accept the situation as it is, without our stories about how it should be, we can see clearly what needs to be done. When we're busy fighting reality, we're too caught up in struggle to see solutions. There's a difference between acceptance and resignation. Resignation is giving up, feeling defeated, collapsing under the weight of circumstances. Acceptance is seeing clearly without the filter of how we wish things were. From acceptance, skillful action becomes possible. From resistance, we just create more suffering. A monk named Hakuan lived in a temple at the edge of a small farming community. The temple was modest, just a few simple buildings surrounded by vegetable gardens. Hakuin was known throughout the region for his peaceful presence. He seemed to move through life without struggle, meeting everything with the same calm attention. People from the village often came to him with their problems. Not because he gave clever advice or special solutions, but because something about his presence helped them see their situations more clearly. One summer morning, a farmer named Ichiro arrived at the temple gates. He was a man in his middle years, weathered by decades of working in the Sunday. His face was lined with worry, his shoulders were tight with tension. Hakuin was working in the garden when Ichiro arrived. He was pulling weeds from around the radish plants, moving slowly and carefully. He looked up as the farmer approached. "Master Hakuin," Ichiro said, his voice strained. "A terrible thing has happened. My ox has died." Hakuin set down the weeds he was holding. He stood and brushed the soil from his hands. "I'm sorry to hear this," he said simply. "You don't understand," Ichiro continued, the words spilling out. "I need the ox to plow my fields. Without the ox, I cannot prepare the earth for planting. Without planting, there will be no rice. Without rice, my family will starve this winter. My children will go hungry. My wife is already worried. What am I going to do?" The farmer's voice was rising, panic clear in every word. His hands were shaking. Hakuin listened calmly. When Ichiro finished, there was a moment of silence. A bird called from somewhere in the trees. The wind moved through the garden. "Your ox has passed away," Hakuin said quietly. "Yes, that's what I'm telling you. It's a disaster. Your ox has died," Hakuin repeated, his tone unchanged. "That is what happened." Ichiro looked confused, frustrated. "But what should I do? What can you do?" The question hung in the air. Ichiro opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He stood there, his face tight with frustration. "I don't understand," he said finally. "I come to you for help and you just repeat my problem back to me." "I'm not repeating your problem," Hakuin said gently. "I'm trying to help you see what your problem actually is." "My problem is that my ox died." "No," Hakuin said. "Your ox passing away is a fact, it's a situation. Your problem is everything you're adding to that fact." He gestured to a bench near the garden. "Sit with me for a moment." Reluctantly, Ichiro Saturday Hakuin sat beside him. "Tell me," Hakuin said, "has your family already starved?" "No." "Are your children hungry right now?" "Is the planting season over?" "Not yet." "So right now, in this moment, what is actually true?" Ichiro paused. "My ox has died, yes. And what else is true right now?" "I need to plow my fields." "Yes, what else?" Ichiro thought for a moment. "I suppose my family is fine right now. The planting season hasn't passed. I still have time." "Good. So when you take away all the stories about disaster and difficult futures, what are you actually facing?" "I need to find a way to plow my fields without my ox." "Yes," Hakuin said. "That's your actual situation, not a disaster, not an ending, just a situation that needs a response." They sat in silence for a while. Ichiro Tunk's breathing began to slow. His shoulders dropped slightly. "I suppose I could borrow an ox from my neighbor," he said slowly. "Tishi has 2 oxen. He might lend me one for the plowing season, or I could hire someone with an axe to help me. It would cost money, but I have some savings." He paused, thinking, "I could plant crops that don't require deep plowing. Millet doesn't need the earth turned as deeply as rice does. The yield would be smaller, but it would be enough." Hakuin nodded. "There," he said gently, "when you stop fighting with the fact that your ox has died, you can see what's actually possible." Ichiro sat quietly, absorbing this. "I was so caught up in the catastrophe. I was imagining that I couldn't think about solutions." "Yes. Your mind was full of this shouldn't have happened, and this is terrible, and why did this happen to me?" All of that is resistance. It's fighting with what is. And while you're fighting, you can't see clearly. "So, I should just accept that my ox died." "You don't have a choice about that," Hakuin said. "Your ox has already died. That's done. The question is whether you'll accept this fact and work with it, or whether you'll spend your energy fighting with a reality you cannot change." Ichiro nodded slowly. "It still feels wrong. Somehow, like I should be more upset." "You can feel upset." Hakuin said, "Sadness about your ox is natural. Loss is part of life. But there's a difference between feeling sadness and building a whole story of disaster around it. You can feel what you feel and still see clearly what needs to be done. The farmer stood up. His face looked different now. Still concerned, but not panicked. Still worried, but not overwhelmed. "Thank you, Master Hakuin." Clears throat. "I think I understand now. I was making the situation worse by fighting with it." After Ichiro left, one of Hakuin's students who had been listening nearby approached Master. That seemed so simple, yet I could see it changed everything for him. "What did you actually do?" I helped him stop adding suffering to his problem. Hakuin said, "The ox dying is one thing. All his stories about starvation and disaster were another thing. He was creating a catastrophe in his mind that didn't exist in reality. Once he could see what was actually true rather than what he was imagining, he could respond skillfully." Is this what Zen Buddhism teaches? Partly Zen teaching shows us how much of our suffering we create through resistance. Pain is inevitable in life. The ox dies, the drought comes, people get sick, these things happen. But suffering, the mental anguish we add on top of these facts, that's optional, that comes from our refusal to accept what is. The student thought about this. But isn't acceptance like giving up? Not at all. Acceptance is the beginning of skillful response. When you accept what is, you can see clearly. When you're fighting what is, you're blind to possibilities. Ichiro couldn't see his options until he accepted his ox had died. His resistance blocked his clarity. Zen Buddhism teaches us that much of our suffering comes not from our circumstances, but from our resistance to our circumstances. Pain is inevitable in life. Loss happens, things break, plans fall apart, bodies age. This is the nature of being alive, but suffering, the additional layer of mental anguish we create that comes from our refusal to let things be as they are. You feel physical discomfort. That's pain. It's real, it's present. But then you add thoughts. This shouldn't be happening. I can't stand this. When will this end? This is unbearable. Each thought creates more tension, more resistance. The original pain is still there, but now you've added suffering on top of it. The pain might not change, but the suffering, that's something we're creating moment by moment through our relationship with the pain. This teaching becomes especially relevant when we're trying to rest. We lie down wanting to sleep, and sleep doesn't come immediately. This is common. It's normal, but what do? We can accept that we're awake right now and rest peacefully anyway, or we can fight it. I should be asleep by now. Why am I still awake? This is terribly exhausted, tomorrow never going to fall asleep. Each thought creates more tension, more resistance, and this tension makes sleep even less likely. We've created a cycle where our fight against being awake keeps us awake. Our resistance to the present moment prevents us from moving into the next moment. There was a master named Daito who lived in the mountains. Students came to his small hermitage to study Zen Buddhism with him. One evening, a young monk named Kenji approached him with a troubled face. "Master," he said, "I'm struggling. When I try to meditate, my legs hurt. When I try to sleep, my mind races. When I try to be calm, I feel restless. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Daito was sitting by a small fire. He poked at the coals gently, watching the sparks rise. "You're fighting," he said simply. "Fighting what?" "Fighting your legs when they hurt. Fighting your mind when it races. Fighting yourself when you feel restless. You're at war with your own experience. But surely I should do something about these problems. The problems aren't your legs hurting or your mind racing or your body feeling restless. Those are just experiences. The problem is that you're adding a war on top of those experiences. And all this fighting creates more tension than the original discomfort." Kenji frowned. "So I should just ignore the pain and the thoughts?" "No, not ignore. Just stop making them into enemies that must be defeated. Your legs hurt during meditation. That's what's happening. Your mind is busy when you lie down. That's what's happening. You feel restless. That's what's happening. These are just conditions. They change on their own. But when you fight them, you lock them in place." "I don't understand," Daito smiled. Tonight, when you lie down to sleep, try something different. Don't try to make anything happen. Don't try to force sleep or calm or stillness. Just let yourself be exactly as you are. If your mind is busy, let it be busy. If you feel restless, let yourself feel restless. Stop insisting that you should be different than you are right now. That night, Kenji returned to his small room with doubt in his heart. This advice seemed too simple. How could just allowing things to be solved his problems? Surely he needed to do something, but he decided to try what Daito had suggested. He lay down on his mat. Almost immediately, his mind began its usual activity. Thoughts about the day, worries about tomorrow, random memories, planning, analyzing the constant stream he had come to dread. His first impulse was the same as always, to push the thoughts away, to try to force his mind to be quiet. But he remembered Daito's words, just let it be. So he did something he'd never tried before. He let his mind be busy. He didn't engage with the thoughts, didn't follow them or build on them, but he also didn't push them away. He just let them be there, moving through like weather. Something unexpected happened. Without his usual struggle to make the thoughts stop, they began to settle on their own. It was gradual, natural, like mud settling in water when you stop stirring it. His resistance had been keeping the thoughts active, giving them energy. When he stopped fighting, they lost their power. He still didn't fall asleep right away, but the time he spent awake was different. It was peaceful. He was resting even while his eyes were open, because he had stopped the internal battle. He had stopped insisting that this moment should be different than it was. Eventually, without noticing when it happened, he drifted into sleep. Deep, restful sleep. When he woke the next morning, he felt more restored than he had in weeks. He found Daito in the garden, tending to the herbs that grew along the path. "Master," he said, "something shifted last night when I stopped fighting with my experience. Everything softened." Daito nodded. This is what Zen Buddhism points to. We think our effort and control create peace, but often they create struggle. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stop doing, stop interfering, let things be. This is the wisdom of letting things be. Not passive, not defeated, but wise enough to know when our interference creates more problems than it solves. Wise enough to recognize that some things settle naturally when we stop stirring them up. Tonight, as you rest, you can practice this same allowing. Your body knows how to relax. You don't need to force it. Your breath knows its own rhythm. You don't need to control it. Your mind will settle when you stop demanding that it settle right now. You don't need to fight your way to peace. You can simply allow peace to emerge naturally when you stop creating struggle, like the bamboo bending and then returning, like the tea master meeting the spilled water, like the farmer seeing past his catastrophe. You can meet this moment without resistance. This is what Zen Buddhism offers. Not a technique to master, but a release from unnecessary effort. Not a goal to achieve, but a relaxation into what's already here. The peace you seek is not in the future, after you fix everything and make yourself perfect. It's available right now in this allowing, in this letting be. Release your grip on how things should be. Meet this moment as it is. Trust that the same intelligence that grows your hair and heals your wounds knows how to bring you into rest. You don't need to micromanage the process. You can surrender to the wisdom that's deeper than your conscious control. The bamboo doesn't think about how to survive the storm. It just bends. The river doesn't plan its route around the rocks. It just flows. And you too can move through this moment with that same natural ease. Not by trying harder, but by trying less. Not by forcing more, but by allowing what wants to happen naturally. This is the practice of letting things be. Simple, profound, available right now. There's a way of looking that Zen Buddhism teaches. Not just seeing with the eyes, but seeing clearly without the overlay of our opinions and judgments. Most of the time, we don't actually see what's in front of us. We see our thoughts about what's in front of us. We see our labels, our categories, our preferences. We see through a filter of good and bad, right and wrong, pleasant and unpleasant. This filter separates us from direct experience. It puts a layer of thinking between us and reality. And this layer creates problems that don't need to exist. When you see a tree, you rarely just see the tree itself. You see oak tree, or that tree needs trimming, or I like that tree, or trees are nice. You see your knowledge about trees, your opinions about trees, your relationship to trees. But the actual tree, the thing itself standing there in its particular way, that's harder to see. Your concepts get in the way. Zen teaching points to a different way of seeing. Seeing without the constant commentary. Looking at what's actually here without immediately sorting it into categories. This doesn't mean we stop knowing things or using words. It means we recognize the difference between the thing itself and our thoughts about the thing. A flower is a flower before you know its name, before you decide if you like it, before you compare it to other flowers, before you think about whether it belongs in this garden or would look better somewhere else. There's the flower just being what it is. And then there's everything you add to it. Zen Buddhism invites us to practice seeing the flower before all the additions to meet reality directly before our thinking mind gets involved. This direct seeing changes everything. It brings a freshness to life, a sense of meeting each moment new. In a monastery in the mountains, there was a teacher named who was known for his simple, direct way of teaching. He didn't give long lectures or complicated explanations. He mostly just pointed at things. A young student named Yuki came to study with him. Yuki was educated and intelligent. He had read many books about Zen Buddhism. He could quote the old masters. He understood the concepts, but could see that all this knowledge was getting in the way of actual seeing. One spring morning, invited Yuki to walk with him in the garden. They walked in silence for a while. The air was cool and fresh. Morning dew still clung to the grass. Birds were calling to each other across the garden. Stopped beside a plum tree, a single branch had blossomed, its white flowers bright against the dark bark. He pointed at the flowers. "What do you see?" he asked. Yuki looked at the flowers. "I see plum blossoms," he said confidently. "They're beautiful. They symbolize resilience, blooming while it's still cold. In poetry, they often represent purity and renewal. These look like they might be from an old variety, perhaps 50 years old or more. The petals are particularly white this year, probably due to the recent rains." Listen to all of this. Then he asked again, more quietly. But Yuki looked confused. "I just told you plum blossoms. What else is there to see? Look again this time. Look without using words. Look without your knowledge. Look without comparing or analyzing or remembering what you've read. Just look." Yuki turned back to the flowers. He tried to do what suggested, but it was harder than he expected. Every time he looked at the flowers, words came. White, beautiful, plum, blossom. His mind immediately labeled everything it saw. He tried to push the words away, but that just created more thinking. Don't think of words, just look. Stop labeling, more words about not using words. He stood there for a long time, frustrated. Waited patiently beside him, saying nothing. Finally, Yuki stopped trying so hard. He let his eyes rest on the flowers without effort. And for just a moment, something shifted. He saw the flowers without the layer of thinking, just shapes, light and shadow, the particular curve of each petal, the way the morning sun caught the edges, the small drops of dew trembling on the stamens. It lasted only a few seconds before his thinking mind rushed back in with more labels and descriptions. But in those few seconds, he had seen something directly, not plum blossoms, but the actual thing itself without the filter of concepts. He turned to with wonder in his eyes. It was so immediate, so alive. "For a moment I saw the flowers without seeing flowers. Does that make sense?" Smiled. "Now, you're beginning to understand what Zen Buddhism points to. The flowers were always there just as they are, but your knowledge about flowers was blocking you from seeing them directly. When your thinking quieted, You could see clearly. But how do I see that way all the time? You practice and you recognize that most of the time, you're not seeing things as they are. You're seeing your thoughts about things. This recognition itself begins to create space for clearer seeing. Over the following weeks, Yuki practiced this direct seeing. He would look at something, a rock, a bowl, a shadow on the wall, and notice all the thinking that immediately arose. He learned to recognize the difference between the thing itself and his mental commentary about the thing. At first, it felt strange and difficult. His mind was so used to labeling everything immediately. He would see a bird, and sparrow would appear in his mind before he could even register the actual bird. He would taste his food, and good or bland or needs salt would arise before he could experience the actual taste. But gradually he began to notice small gaps, brief moments where he saw or heard or felt something before the thinking mind caught up. These moments were fresh and vivid in a way his usual experience wasn't. It was like seeing color for the first time after years of seeing only in shades of gray. One morning he was sweeping the temple steps when he noticed how the bamboo broom sounded against the stone. Not sweeping sound or satisfying or rhythmic, just the actual sound itself without any labels. He stopped moving, amazed. He had swept these steps hundreds of times, but had never actually heard the sound before. He'd heard his thoughts about the sound, but not the sound itself. Passed by and saw him standing still, the broom in his hands, listening. "You've discovered something," said. "It wasn't a question." "The sound," Yuki said. "I've never really heard it before." Nodded. Most people go through their whole lives never really seeing, never really hearing, never really tasting. They experience their thoughts about things, but not the things themselves. This is why life feels dull to many people. They're not meeting life directly, they're meeting their concepts about life. Is this what Zen Buddhism means by awakening, this direct seeing? It's the beginning, said. When you can see clearly without all your concepts in the way, you discover that everything is already alive, already vibrant, already complete. You've been looking for something special, something more than what's here, but what's here seen clearly is extraordinary. It changed his meditation too. Before, when he sat, he was always thinking about his meditation. Am I doing this right? Is this what I should be feeling? My posture feels off. I think I'm getting better at this all, thinking about the experience rather than being present to the experience itself. Now he began to notice these thoughts without getting caught in them. He could feel his breathing without thinking breathing. He could hear sounds without thinking birdsong or wind in the trees. The direct experience became more available when he stopped covering it with labels, and something unexpected happened. When he wasn't busy judging his meditation as good or bad, trying to make it fit some idea of what meditation should be, his mind settled naturally. The constant evaluation had been keeping his mind active. When he could just sit without all the judging, without all the labeling, stillness arose on its own. This teaching about seeing without judgment goes deep into Zen Buddhism's understanding of how we create suffering. We don't just see things, we immediately judge them, good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, desirable or undesirable. This constant judging creates a sense of separation, of being at odds with reality. When something pleasant appears, we grasp at it. We want it to stay. We think, this is good. I want more of this. When something unpleasant appears, we push against it. We want it to leave. We think this is bad. I don't want this. And neutral things we barely notice at all, already looking past them for something more interesting. All this sorting creates tension. It puts us in a relationship of constant negotiation with reality. We're always trying to get more of what we label good and less of what we label bad. We're rarely just meeting what's actually here without the filter of our preferences. In a small village, there was an abbot named Tetsu who managed a temple that served the local community. The temple was open to anyone who needed shelter or food. Travelers stopped there. Poor people came for rice. Families brought their problems. One evening, a man came to the temple gate. He was thin and dirty, his clothes torn. His face was hard, his eyes weary. He didn't ask for food or shelter. He didn't bow respectfully. He just stood at the gate looking around. The monks, who saw him, whispered to each other, "That's Gyuan. He's a thief. He's been to prison twice. He steals from farmers. We should send him away." But Tetsu, hearing the whispers, came to the gate himself. He looked at the man standing there. He didn't see thief or criminal or dangerous person. He just saw a thin man with weary eyes. "Are you hungry?" Tetsu asked. The man seemed surprised by the direct question. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Come in. We're about to serve the evening meal." The monks were shocked. One of them, a senior monk named Kosho, approached Tetsu after Goemon had been given food and a place to sleep. "Master, do you know who that man is? He's a thief. He's not to be trusted. Why did you let him in?" "I saw a hungry man," Tetsu said simply. "But he's a criminal." "Is he committing a crime right now?" "Well, no. So, right now in this moment, what is actually true about him?" Kosho thought about this. "He's hungry. He's tired. He looks like he hasn't had a proper meal in days." "Yes, that's what I saw. A human being who needs food and rest. Everything else is labels we're adding. But those labels are true. He has stolen from people, perhaps. He has," Tetsu said. "But if I look at him and see only a thief, I don't see the actual person in front of me. I see my judgment, and my judgment makes it impossible to respond with wisdom." Gaman stayed at the temple for 3 days. The first day he barely spoke to anyone. He ate his meals quickly, eyes down. He slept in the corner of the guest hall, far from the other travelers. The monks watched him carefully, making sure their belongings were secure. But on the second day, Tetsu asked him if he would help with some work around the temple. There was wood to chop, water to carry from the well. Jiman looked surprised, but agreed. He worked steadily through the day. His movements were efficient, practiced. He had clearly done hard labor before. As he worked, some of the tension in his shoulders began to ease. The weary look in his eyes softened slightly. By the third day, he was eating meals with the monks. Not talking much, but present. One of the younger monks, forgetting himself, started to tell a funny story about a confused rooster in the temple yard. Gaman smiled. It was just a small smile, but it changed his whole face. That evening, as the sun was setting, he came to find Tetsu. The abbot was in the garden pulling weeds from around the vegetable beds. "Why are you being kind to me?" Gaman asked. His voice was rough, as if the question had been difficult to form. "Everyone else looks at me and sees a criminal. They cross the streets when they see me coming. They hide their belongings. Mothers pull their children close. But you just see a person." Tetsu set down the weeds he was holding. He looked at Jaman for a long moment. "I try to see what's actually here," he said, "not what I think about what's here. You're a human being. Human beings need food, shelter, kindness. That's what I see." "I have stolen things," Gon said quietly, looking down. "The monks are right about that. I've taken from people who worked hard for what they had. I've caused suffering. What you've done in the past is in the past. It's already happened. It's finished. Right now, in this moment, you're a man standing in front of me, speaking honestly about what you've done. That's what's real right now." Gaman was quiet for a long time. A cricket started chirping somewhere in the darkening garden. "No one has ever looked at me without judgment before," he said finally. "Even I look at myself and see only thief. That's all I am. That's all I'll ever be." "Is that what you are right now?" Tetsu asked gently. "Right now, in this moment, are you stealing something?" "No." "Are you hurting anyone?" "No." "Then who are you right now?" Gaman looked up, confusion in his eyes. "I don't know exactly. When we take away the label thief, when we look beyond your past actions, there's just a person. A person who has done certain things, yes, but not a thing. A person living, breathing, changing. This moment is not the same as the last moment. You are not fixed as what you were yesterday or last year. But I've done terrible things. Perhaps you have. But judgment separates us from each other, Tetsu said. It puts a wall between us. When I judge you, I can't see you clearly. I can only see my ideas about you. Zen Buddhism teaches us to look beyond our judgments to what's actually present. And what's present right now is a person who is asking questions, who is reflecting on his actions, who is capable of change. Tears welled up in Gon's eyes. I don't know how to be anything other than what people say I am. You don't have to be anything, Tetsu said. You just have to be present here, now, this moment. Not carrying all your past actions like a weight around your neck. Not believing that what you did is all you are. Just here, breathing alive in this moment. The next morning, Gaiman left the temple, but something in him had changed. Someone had seen him without the label of thief. Someone had looked past his history and seen him as he was right now. This changed how he saw himself. Years later, Gaiman returned to the temple. He had found work as a carpenter. He had stopped stealing. He brought an offering to Tetsu. You saw me when no one else could, he said. You looked at me without your judgment blinding you. That seeing saved me. After Goemon left, Kosho approached Tetsu. Master, I judged too quickly. I saw a label instead of a person. We all do this, Tetsu said. It's the habit of the mind to sort everything into categories immediately. Good person, bad person, safe, dangerous, worthy, unworthy. But these labels are just thoughts. They are not reality. When we can see past them, even for a moment, we see more clearly. Is this what Zen Buddhism means by seeing clearly? Partly. Clear seeing means looking at what's actually here without the filter of our judgments. A person is not their past actions. A moment is not good or bad until we label it so. Things simply are what they are. When we can see this, we respond more wisely. Our actions come from clarity rather than from our conditioned thinking. This practice of seeing without judgment changes how we meet every moment. Most of the time we're so busy judging our experience that we're not actually present to it. We're thinking about it, evaluating it, comparing it to other experiences. But the actual experience itself, the raw presence of what's happening right now, we miss that. You sit down to rest. Immediately your mind starts judging. This is comfortable, or this is uncomfortable. I like this feeling, or I don't like this feeling. This is how rest should feel, or this isn't how rest should feel. All this judging creates a layer between you and the actual experience of resting. What if you could just rest without all the commentary? Just feel what you're actually feeling without labeling it as good or bad. The experience becomes simpler, more direct, less complicated by your thinking about it. There was a farmer named Isamu who worked land his family had tended for generations. His grandfather had shaped these fields. His father had planted the fruit trees that now provided shade. The land was in his blood, the rhythms of its seasons, as familiar to him as his own breathing. He grew rice in the wet patties that lay in the low ground, where water from the mountain streams could be channeled. In the higher fields, he grew vegetables, beans and radishes and greens. His life followed the rhythm of the seasons, planting in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in fall, resting in winter. Each season had its work, its particular weather, its own character. One year the spring rains failed. The rainy season should have begun in the 4th month, bringing the steady rains that filled the patties and soaked the fields. But the 4th month came and the sky stayed clear. Day after day of bright sunshine, when there should have been grey clouds and soft rain, the rice seedlings in Isamu's patties began to wither. He had transplanted them into the patties, expecting the rains to come. But the patties stayed shallow, the water level dropping day by day as the sun evaporated what little was there. The young vegetables in his fields drooped by midday, their leaves going limp in the heat. His neighbors gathered to talk about the drought. Their faces were tight with worry. "This is terrible," said one farmer. "A disaster. If the rains don't come soon, we'll lose everything. The worst drought in 50 years, said another. "My father told me about the drought of his youth. It looks like this will be worse. It's awful." said a third. All our hard work for nothing. The planting was for nothing. We should have known this would happen. But Isamu listened and said nothing. While his neighbors talked about how terrible everything was, he walked back to his land and studied what needed to be done. The stream that fed his patties was still flowing, though lower than usual. He could dig channels to bring more water to the patties. It would be hard work digging in the heat, but it was possible. He spent the next days creating new irrigation channels, deeper and more direct than the old ones. He carried water in buckets to the vegetables that couldn't be reached by the channels. He worked from first light until dark, his back aching, his hands blistered. But he didn't complain. He didn't call the drought terrible or awful. He didn't judge it as bad. It was just drought. It was what was happening. And he responded to what was actually needed. Then in midsummer, everything changed. Dark clouds rolled in from the south. The first drops of rain were a relief, but the drops became a downpour, and the downpour didn't stop. Day after day of heavy rain, more in a week than usually fell in a month. The patties, dry for so long, now flooded. The water rose too high, threatening to wash out the young rind plants. The irrigation channels Isamu had worked so hard to dig became rushing streams eroding the banks. The river swelled and turned brown with mud, rising toward the edge of its banks. His neighbors gathered again, their worry increasing. Too much rain, they said. This is terrible. After the drought, now floods. The gods are against us. We can't win. First too little water, now too much, said one. It's like a curse. Nothing goes right this year. It's awful, said another. My fields are turning into lakes. The plants will rot. We'll lose everything. But Isamu just looked at the rain falling heavy and straight, drumming on the earth. He walked his land in the rain, mud thick on his legs. He saw where the water was collecting, where it needed to drain. He spent the rainy days building up the banks of his patties higher, keeping the water from washing through. He dug new drainage channels to lead excess water away from where it would do harm. He worked in the mud and rain, his clothes soaked, his feet cold. But he didn't complain. He didn't call the rain terrible or awful. He didn't judge it as bad. It was just rain, heavy rain. And he responded to what was needed. In the fall, when the harvest came, Isamu's yield was reasonable. Not the best harvest he'd ever had. The drought and then the floods had taken their toll, but he had rice enough for his family and seed for next year's planting. His vegetables had survived better than expected. Many of his neighbors had lost most of their crops, not because the weather had been different for them, but because they'd spent so much energy being upset about the weather that they hadn't responded skillfully to it. They'd been so caught up in their judgments about how terrible everything was that they couldn't see clearly what needed to be done. A monk from a nearby temple, a man named Soyen, who sometimes traveled through the region, came to visit Isamu after the harvest. He had heard about the farmer who stayed calm through the difficult season while others despaired. "How did you do it?" So asked. They were sitting on Isamu's porch, looking out at the fields. The harvest was done. The land was resting, stubble from the rice plants poking through the soil. How did you not despair when the drought came? How did you not panic when the floods came? Isamu was sitting on his porch looking out at his fields. The harvest was done. The land was resting. "I didn't waste energy judging the weather," he said simply. "Drought came. That's what happened. I worked with drought, then rain came. That's what happened. I worked with rain. My neighbors spent their energy calling things terrible and awful. I spent my energy responding to what was actually needed. But didn't you feel that the drought was bad?" "Bad for what?" Isamu asked. "Bad for my idea of how the season should go." "Yes. Bad in itself?" "No. Drought is just drought, it's weather. My opinions about it don't change it, they just make me suffer while I deal with it." "So you just accept everything that happens?" "I accept what has already happened," Isamu said. "The drought happened. The floods happened. Fighting with what already happened is pointless. But from acceptance, I could respond clearly. When I wasn't busy judging the situation as terrible, I could see what needed to be done. The monk sat in silence, absorbing this. This is what Zen Buddhism teaches, Isamu continued. Things are what they are before we judge them. Drought, rain, heat, cold, they're just conditions. We add the labels good and bad, and those labels create suffering. When I can see the conditions without my judgments clouding my vision, I can work with what's actually here. Don't you have preferences, though? Wouldn't you prefer normal rains to drought? Of course, Isamu smiled. I'm not a stone. I have preferences, but preferences aren't the same as judgments. I prefer gentle rain, but when drought comes, I don't waste energy insisting it should be raining. I just work with the drought. The situation is what it is. My judgments don't change it, the monk understood. So seeing clearly means seeing what's actually present without the layer of our judgments about whether it should or shouldn't be present. Yes, and from that clear seeing, skillful action becomes possible. My neighbors were so caught up in their judgments about how terrible everything was that they couldn't see clearly what to do. Their judgments blocked their wisdom. This teaching about seeing without judgment is at the heart of Zen Buddhism's approach to life. We spend so much energy judging everything that happens. This is good, that's bad, this should be here, that shouldn't be here. I like this, I don't like that. And all this judging creates a barrier between us and direct experience. When you can see without immediately judging, you meet life more directly. You see what's actually here rather than your opinions about what's here. And from this clearer seeing, you can respond more wisely. Tonight, as you rest, you can practice this clear seeing. Notice how your mind wants to judge everything. This position is comfortable. This feeling is unpleasant. This thought is bad. Each judgment is just that, a judgment, not reality itself. What if you could feel what you're feeling without labeling it? Experience what you're experiencing without sorting it into good and bad. Just this breath, this sensation, this moment without the constant commentary. When you stop judging your experience, something relaxes. You're not in constant negotiation with reality anymore. You're not trying to push away what you've labeled bad and grasp what you've labeled good. You're just here, present to what is. The plum blossoms are just plum blossoms before you think about them. The person is just a person before you label them. The moment is just this moment before you judge it. And when you can see this clearly, even for brief moments, you touch something real. Something that's been here all along beneath your thinking. This is what Zen Buddhism invites you to discover. Not a new way of thinking, but a way of seeing that comes before thinking. Not better judgments, but the space before judgment. Not improved opinions, but direct contact with what's actually here. Let your seeing be simple tonight. Let your experience be direct. Let this moment be just what it is without your ideas about what it should be. This clear seeing is itself a kind of rest, a release from the constant work of judging everything, a return to simple presence. Zen Buddhism has a particular relationship with silence, not the absence of sound, but something deeper, a quality of stillness that can be present even when there's noise, a quietness of mind that reveals what words and thinking cannot reach. We live in a world that fears silence. We fill every space with sound. Music playing, people talking, televisions running in empty rooms. Even in our own minds, there's constant noise. Thoughts chattering, memories replaying, plans forming, the inner voice commenting on everything, never stopping, never resting. But Zen teaching points to something underneath all this noise. A silence that's always present, like the space in which all sounds occur. This silence isn't empty or dead. It's alive and aware. It's the background that makes all sounds possible, the way a canvas makes painting possible. When you can touch this silence, even briefly, something shifts. The constant pressure to think, to know, to figure everything out, that pressure eases. You discover that you don't need to fill every moment with mental activity. You can simply be present, resting in awareness without thought constantly running. This doesn't mean you stop thinking altogether. Thoughts still arise when they are needed, but there's space between them. Gaps where silence shows through, and in these gaps, a different kind of knowing becomes possible. Not the knowing that comes from thinking, but the knowing that comes from direct presence. In a mountain monastery, there lived a teacher named Mugaku, who rarely spoke. His students would sometimes sit with him for days, without hearing him say a single word. This wasn't because he had taken a vow of silence. He simply didn't speak unless speech was truly needed. One spring, a scholar came to visit the monastery. His name was Kazan, and he had studied Zen Buddhism extensively. He had read all the ancient texts, the writings preserved from China and passed down through generations. He could quote the old masters, recite their famous exchanges, explain their cryptic sayings. He knew the philosophical arguments and the doctrinal positions. He had attended lectures by famous teachers. He was by all measures an expert on Zen. He arrived at the monastery on a bright morning, the mountain path behind him still wet with dew. He carried with him several books and many pages of notes. He had spent weeks preparing his questions for Mugaku, making them precise and penetrating. He wanted to discuss the nature of enlightenment, the relationship between sudden and gradual awakening, the meaning of emptiness, the practice of non-attachment. Mugaku received him in the monastery's guest room. The room was simple, as everything in the monastery was simple. Tatami mats covered the floor, clean and well maintained. A single scroll hung in the alcove, showing just one word in brush calligraphy. Here the room smelled faintly of incense. The scholar bowed formally and sat down across from Mugaku. He arranged his robes carefully around him. He set his books beside him, ready to reference them if needed. He cleared his throat, preparing to begin his first question. He had rehearsed his opening many times on the journey up the mountain, but before he could speak, before the first word could leave his mouth, Mugaku raised his hand slightly. Just a small gesture, gentle and unhurried. Then the teacher closed his eyes and sat in stillness, his back straight, his face peaceful, his breathing slow, and even the scholar waited. This must be a brief settling before the discussion would begin. Surely the master would speak soon, would invite him to ask his questions any moment now. But Mugaku remained silent. His face showed no sign of preparing to speak. He simply sat present and still like a mountain. Minutes passed. The scholar began to feel uncomfortable. Should he speak? Should he clear his throat? Should he wait longer? He had come so far, walked so many miles up the mountain path. He had so many important questions, carefully formulated questions that would demonstrate his understanding and push his knowledge deeper. But the master's silence was somehow compelling. It seemed to fill the room, to have its own presence and weight. To speak into it felt like it would be an interruption, almost a violation, so the scholar waited, his first question sitting unsaid in his mouth. More time passed, 10 minutes, 20. The scholar could hear his own breathing, faster than the master's. He could hear the wind moving through the pine trees outside. He could hear a bird calling from somewhere in the forest, its song rising and falling. His carefully prepared questions started to seem less urgent. In fact, they started to feel heavy, like stones he was carrying. All his knowledge about Zen Buddhism, all his intellectual understanding, all the books he had read and memorized, suddenly felt like they were weighing him down rather than lifting him up. His mind, usually so active with thoughts and questions and analysis, began to slow. There was nothing to respond to, no conversation to engage with, no intellectual challenge to meet, just the silence of the room, the sound of wind outside, the distant call of a crow, the faint smell of incense, the light slowly changing as the sun moved across the sky. An hour passed. Then, too, the scholar's initial discomfort had transformed into something else. Not comfort exactly, but a kind of ease. He wasn't waiting for something to happen anymore. He was just sitting, just breathing, just present. His body, which had been tense with anticipation, began to relax. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched. His breathing slowed to match the rhythm he heard from Mugaku. Without intending to, he found himself sitting more like the master, present to the moment, without grasping at anything. The questions he had prepared, so carefully worded and deeply considered, started to dissolve, not because they were answered, but because they no longer seemed to matter. He had been trying to understand Zen Buddhism through his intellect, through concepts and explanations and logical frameworks. But sitting here in this silence, something beyond intellect was becoming clear. As the afternoon light began to fade, as shadows lengthened across the tatami mats, something shifted in the scholar. He couldn't have explained what happened. It wasn't a thought or a realization in the normal sense. But all his questions dissolved, not because they were answered, but because they no longer needed to be asked. He had been seeking something through words and concepts that couldn't be reached that way. The seeking itself had been the obstacle. Mugaku opened his eyes and looked at the scholar. The scholar's face had changed completely. The tightness around his eyes had softened. His shoulders were dropped and easy. The set of his jaw had relaxed. He looked like a different person, younger somehow, more present. He looked like someone who had set down a heavy burden. "Thank you," the scholar said quietly. "I understand now." Mugaku smiled slightly. "What do you understand that I was looking for something in words that lives in silence?" "All my questions were about trying to grasp with my thinking mind what can only be met directly." Mugaku nodded. "Words can point toward truth, but they cannot hold it. Truth is like water. You can point at water, describe water, talk about water, but to know water you must drink. To know silence you must be silent." The scholar stayed at the monastery for several more days. Each day he spent hours sitting in silence with Mugaku, and each day his understanding deepened. Not through learning more, but through thinking less. Not through gaining knowledge, but through resting in the space before knowledge arises. On the day he left, he said to Muku, "I came here as a scholar of Zen Buddhism. I'm leaving as a student of silence." "Good," Mugaku said. "Books can teach you about Zen, but only silence can teach you Zen itself." This teaching about silence goes to the heart of Zen Buddhism's approach. Words are useful. They can point, suggest, indicate, but the reality they point to must be experienced directly, not through the filter of language. When your mind is constantly full of words and thoughts, you're always one step removed from direct experience. You're thinking about life rather than living it. You're describing the moment rather than being present to it. And in this constant thinking, you miss what's actually here. Silence creates a gap in the thinking, and in that gap, direct experience becomes possible. You're not thinking about your breath, you're breathing. You're not thinking about sounds, you're hearing. You're not thinking about being present, you're present. But we fear this silence. We've become so identified with our thinking that silence feels like a kind of death. If we're not thinking, we wonder, do we even exist? So we fill every moment with mental noise, with constant activity, with endless commentary. Zen Buddhism invites us to discover what's here when the commentary stops. Not emptiness or absence, but a rich, aware presence. The silence that knows without thinking. The awareness that's here before thoughts arise and remains after thoughts pass. There was a hermit named Sosan who lived alone in a small hut high in the mountains. He had spent years in monasteries studying and practicing, but eventually he felt drawn to solitude, to a life of simplicity and silence. His hut was barely large enough for him to lie down in. He had a few simple possessions, a cooking pot, a blanket, a cushion for sitting, nothing more. His days followed a natural rhythm, rising with the sun, sitting in meditation, gathering firewood, preparing simple meals, sitting again, sleeping when darkness came. He rarely spoke, there was no one to speak to. Sometimes days would pass without him saying a single word out loud, and in this silence something deepened in him. Not loneliness or isolation, but a sense of connection to everything around him. He began to hear things he had never heard before. Not new sounds, but sounds he had been too distracted to notice. The particular way wind moved through pine trees versus cedar trees, the different songs of different birds, the sound of snow falling on a winter night. So quiet, it was almost not a sound at all, just a presence in the air. He began to notice the silence underneath all sounds. The way a bird's call arose from silence, existed for a moment, and returned to silence. The way his own thoughts emerged from stillness, moved through his mind and dissolved back into stillness. One spring, a young monk came climbing up the mountain path to Shan's hut. His name was Doshin, and he had heard about the hermit who lived in silence. The other monks at his monastery told stories about Shan, how he had given up everything to live alone, how he never spoke, how he had found something in his solitude that they couldn't name. Doshin wanted to learn from him. He was tired of the constant noise of monastery life, the talking and the teaching and the endless discussion of Zen Buddhism. He wanted to understand silence, to learn whatever it was that Sosen had discovered. The climb was steep and difficult. The path was barely a path, more like a suggestion through the trees. By the time he reached Sosan's hut, he was out of breath, his robes dusty, his legs aching from the climb. The hut sat in a small clearing. It was tiny, barely large enough for one person. The roof was thatched with grass, the walls were rough wood. A small garden nearby showed where Sanzan grew vegetables. A stream ran down the mountainside not far away, its sound constant. Doshin said, bowing deeply as soon as he caught his breath. "I've come to learn about silence, please teach me." Sosan looked at the young monk with kind eyes. His face was weathered from years in the mountain sun and wind, his hands were rough from work. He gestured for Doshin to sit on a flat rock outside the hut. A natural seat smoothed by weather and time. The monk sat, arranging his robes, settling himself, waiting for teaching to begin. He had his questions ready. What is silence? How does one practice it? What should one do with thoughts when they arise? He was prepared to learn, but he simply went about his simple tasks. He swept the ground around his hut with a broom made from branches bound together. The sound of the sweeping was rhythmic and soft. He checked his water supply, a wooden bucket that caught water from a diverted section of the stream. He arranged kindling for the evening fire, small sticks laid in a careful pattern. The monk watched, confused. When would the teaching begin? Surely this was just preparation for the real instruction. He waited, trying to be patient. As the afternoon wore on, Doshin became more restless. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows shifted. The quality of light changed from the bright clarity of midday to the softer gold of later afternoon. And still said nothing, just continued with his simple tasks, unhurried and present. Doshan's mind was full of questions. Should he ask again? Should he explain that he wanted actual instruction about silence, not just watching someone do chores? Should he point out that he had climbed all this way and deserved more than this? But something kept him quiet. Maybe it was the quality of San's movement. Each action complete in itself. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. Maybe it was the peace in the hermit's face. A stillness that seemed to come from somewhere deep. Or maybe it was the silence itself, which seemed different here than anywhere else Doshin had experienced. It had weight and texture. It was present, almost like a companion. Evening came slowly. The light turned from gold to amber to the first grey of dusk. Birds called their evening songs. The temperature dropped and the air felt sharper, clearer. Sanzan prepared a simple meal, rice cooked over his small fire and mountain vegetables gathered from the forest, wild greens, mushrooms, some early spring shoots. He made enough for two and shared it with Doshan in a simple bowl. They ate in silence, just the sounds of eating and the wind in the trees and the first crickets of evening starting their chorus. The food was plain but tasted somehow better than the elaborate meals at the monastery. Maybe it was the mountain air, maybe it was the simplicity, maybe it was the silence that surrounded them. After the meal, as the last light faded completely from the sky, Sansan sat on his meditation cushion outside the hut. The evening was mild enough for outdoor sitting. Doshin sat on his rock, and they sat together as darkness came completely, as stars appeared one by one overhead, as the night deepened around them, and the sounds of day gave way to the sounds of night. The monk had never experienced silence like this. In the monastery where he lived, there was always some sound. Monks moving through halls, doors sliding open and closed, bells ringing the hours, chanting from the meditation hall. Even during meditation periods when everyone was supposed to be quiet, there were sounds, coughs, robes rustling, someone's stomach growling, and even more than the external sounds, his mind was always full of noise. Thinking about his practice, judging his meditation, comparing himself to other monks, planning his day, reviewing conversations, worrying about whether he was making progress, wondering if his teacher approved of him. The internal commentary never stopped, a constant stream of thinking about everything. But here in this mountain darkness with this hermit who seemed more mountain than man, silence revealed itself as something completely different from what Doshin had imagined. It wasn't the absence of sound. Mountain sounds were everywhere, wind moving through different trees in different ways, the stream running over rocks, an owl calling from somewhere in the forest, small animals moving through the underbrush. The sounds were actually quite rich and varied, but underneath all the sounds was something else. A silence that held all the sounds that made the sounds possible. It was a presence, a fullness, a kind of awareness that wasn't thinking, but was deeply knowing. Everything that needed to be said was being said in this silence, though no words were being used. Hours passed. Doshin lost track of time completely. Time seemed less important here, less real. Somehow his thinking mind, finding nothing to engage with, no conversation to join, no questions to pursue, gradually settled. It was like watching mud settle in water. The stirring stopped and clarity appeared, and underneath his thinking, he discovered what Sohn had been pointing to all along. A silence that had always been there underneath all his mental noise, waiting to be discovered. It wasn't something he needed to create or achieve. It was already present. He just had to stop covering it with his constant thinking. As the first grey light of dawn appeared, as the darkness began to fade at the edges, as the morning birds started their songs, Sanosan spoke for the first time since Doshin had arrived. His voice was quiet, barely louder than the wind. You came seeking teaching about silence, but silence cannot be taught with words. It can only be met directly. You have been sitting in the teaching all night. The monk understood. I was waiting for you to tell me about silence, but you were showing me silence itself. Yes, if I had talked about silence, you would have thoughts about silence, more noise in your mind. But by staying silent, I allowed you to discover what silence actually is, not an idea, a reality. The monk stayed with San for several days. Each day they spoke only a few words. They sat together. They worked together. In silence they shared simple meals, and in this silence the monk's mind settled in a way it never had before. When he prepared to leave to return to his monastery in the valley, he said to Sosan, I thought silence was about being quiet, but it's really about listening. Yes, Sosan said. When you stop filling every moment with your own noise, you can hear what's actually here. The mountain has been speaking all along. The wind has been teaching, but you couldn't hear them through all your thinking. What should I do when I return to the noise of the monastery? Carry this silence with you. It's not dependent on external quiet, it's an inner stillness. You can be silent in the midst of sound. You can be still while moving. The silence we've shared here isn't in the mountain, it's in you. You just needed quiet enough to discover it. This teaching about silence that Zen Buddhism offers isn't about external quiet, though external quiet can help us discover it. It's about an inner stillness, a quality of awareness that isn't disturbed by sound or movement or activity. You can be in a crowded place and touch this silence. You can be in the middle of activity and rest in this stillness, because the silence isn't out there. It's the nature of awareness itself, the space in which all experience arises. When you identify with your thoughts, you're in constant noise. The thinking never stops. Even when you're trying to be quiet, the mind chatters. But when you recognize yourself as the awareness in which thoughts arise, you discover you're already silent. Thoughts come and go, but the awareness that knows them is still and silent. Most of us have experienced this silence briefly, even if we didn't name it that way. A moment when thinking stopped and you were just present looking at a sunset. And for a few seconds, there was no commentary, just seeing. Listening to music and losing yourself completely. No thoughts, just sound. These moments of silence are always available. We just usually miss them because we're so busy thinking. In a village at the edge of a forest, there was a woman named who was known for her skill in the tea ceremony. She had studied the formal ceremony for many years, learning each precise movement, each traditional element, each piece of equipment, and its proper use. She had learned from masters in the city, spent years perfecting the forms, memorizing the sequences, understanding the meanings. But as she grew older, something in her practice changed. It became less about the elaborate forms and more about something essential underneath them. Her ceremonies became simpler with fewer elements. She used only what was necessary, letting go of anything ornamental or extra. And more than the physical simplicity, her ceremonies became quieter, less talking before, during, and after. Less explanation of what she was doing or why. More silence, long pauses between movements. Space between each action, as if the silence itself was part of the ceremony. People who came to her tea ceremonies often left feeling changed, though they couldn't quite say what had changed them. It wasn't the tea itself, though that was good. It wasn't the beauty of the setup. Though Kay's arrangements were simple and lovely, it was something about the quality of presence, the depth of silence that touched something in them. One winter, a young woman named Yuri came to learn from Kay. Yuri had studied tea ceremony in the city, where the practice was formal and elaborate. Many rules, many pieces of equipment, many things to remember and perform correctly. She had learned it all and done well, but she felt something was missing. The ceremony felt more like performance than practice, more about showing skill than being present. She had heard about Kay, about the simple ceremonies that somehow went deeper than the elaborate ones. So she traveled to the village and asked to study. On a cold afternoon, with snow falling softly outside, Kay invited Yuri to join her for tea. It was their first ceremony together. The tea room was small and spare, smaller than any tea room Yuri had used in the city. The walls were plain wood, unpainted. The floor had simple tatami mats, well worn but clean. A single hanging scroll showed a circle brushed in black ink. Just a circle, nothing more. The alcove held no flower arrangement, unusual for a tea ceremony. The only sound was the gentle bubbling of water heating over charcoal. A sound called wind in the pines by those who knew tea. Kay moved through the ceremony with great care, but also with long pauses that Yuri found surprising. She would make one movement, the folding of a cloth, and then sit in stillness for what felt like a full minute before the next movement. She would pour water, then pause again, just being present. The silence between actions seemed as important as the actions themselves. Yuri watched, trying to learn the technique, trying to understand what she was supposed to be learning. But there was no complicated technique to observe. Kay's movements were simple, even basic, nothing fancy, nothing that required years of training to perform. What made the ceremony powerful was something else. The quality of presence Kay brought to each action. The silence she carried with her, the way she was completely present to each moment without rushing ahead to the next. The tea itself, when it came, was made with great care, but no fussiness. The temperature was right, the amount was right, but more than the technical correctness, there was a feeling of completeness in the making, as if nothing else in the world existed in that moment except the making of this tea. After Kay had served the tea and Yuri had drunk it, following the traditional forms she had learned in the city, they sat together. The silence stretched out. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was unfamiliar to Yuri. In the city there was always talk after the ceremony, discussion of the tea, comments on the flower arrangement, questions about the scroll. But here, Kay simply sat present and still. Yuri felt she should say something, should comment on the excellent tea, or ask a question about some aspect of the ceremony. But Kay's peaceful presence made speech seem unnecessary. More than unnecessary. It seemed like it would break something important, like shouting in a quiet forest. So they sat for a long time, listening to the sound of snow falling outside, not talking about the snow or the tea or the ceremony, just present to the moment as it was. The charcoal fire settling, the snow accumulating on the roof, the light fading as afternoon moved toward evening. Finally, after a silence that must have lasted half an hour, Kay spoke. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, matching the quality of the moment in the city. Tea ceremony is often about performance, about showing skill, demonstrating knowledge, proving you've learned the forms correctly. But the heart of tea ceremony is meeting two people tea. This moment when we fill the ceremony with too much talking, too much explanation, too much display, we miss the actual meeting. But don't students need to learn the proper forms? Yuri asked, keeping her voice quiet to match. The forms are important at first. They provide structure, a container for the practice, but eventually the forms should become transparent. You don't think about them anymore. They happen naturally, like breathing. You just move and the forms appear on their own because they've become part of you. Then the real ceremony can begin. The ceremony of presence, of silence, of meeting the moment as it is. How do I learn this? Is there a practice? Practice silence, Kay said simply. Not just external silence, though that helps at first, inner silence. Notice how much mental commentary you have as you perform the ceremony. Am I doing this right? Does my teacher approve? This is the folding of the cloth. All these thoughts take you away from the actual doing. They create noise that covers the silence underneath. Over the following weeks, Yuri stayed in the village and practiced with Kay. She began to pay attention to her inner commentary in a way she never had before. She noticed that when she prepared tea, her mind was constantly talking, judging her performance, evaluating each movement, remembering what her previous teachers had said, comparing herself to other students, planning what to do next, worrying about mistakes, the actual actions, the feel of the bowl in her hands, the sound of the water pouring, the smell of the tea, the weight of the scoop. She was barely present to any of it. She was lost in thoughts about it. Thoughts about it. Layers of thinking that kept her separate from direct experience. She started practicing with less thinking. When she folded the cloth, she just feeling the texture of the silk, noticing the way it moved, present to the actual folding. When she poured water, she just poured water, hearing the sound, watching the steam rise, feeling the warmth. Every time her mind started its commentary, she noticed it and returned to the direct experience of what she was doing. Something shifted in her ceremony. It became less performance and more presence. Less about doing it right and more about being fully present to each action. And in this presence, silence naturally arose. Not because she was forcing herself to be quiet, not because she was trying to achieve some special state, but because she was too present to the moment to be thinking about it. The thinking dropped away on its own when there was nothing to think about, only the direct experience of each action. "You're beginning to understand," Kay told her after a ceremony they did together one morning. The snow had stopped and pale sunlight filled the tea room. Zen Buddhism teaches that the extraordinary is hidden in the ordinary, but we miss it because we're so busy thinking about the ordinary that we never actually experience it. Silence allows us to meet the moment directly without all our thoughts in the way. "Is this what all Zen practice is about?" Yuri asked. "Learning to be silent partly. Silence reveals what's always here but usually covered by thinking. In this silence you discover that each moment is complete in itself. Making tea is just making tea. Nothing needs to be added to it. It's already enough." This is what the ceremony teaches when we practice with silence, that this moment, this action, this breath is already whole. This wisdom of silence that Zen Buddhism points to is available in every moment. You don't need to go to a mountain hermitage or practice elaborate ceremonies. You can touch silence right here, right now. Your thoughts will come. That's natural. They're like waves on the ocean of silence. Let them come and go. You don't need to fight them or follow them. Just notice that underneath the waves, the ocean is still and silent. Zen Buddhism teaches that this silence is your true nature, deeper than your thoughts, more fundamental than your thinking mind. The awareness that's here before thought arises and remains after thought passes. This silence is always available, always here, always ready to receive you when you stop running and simply rest in what is. Let yourself settle into this silence. Now let the noise of thinking gradually quiet. Let the stillness underneath become more apparent. This is the wisdom of silence. Not something to achieve, but something to discover, already here, already present, already holding you in its peace. There's a way of holding things that Zen Buddhism teaches. Not with a tight fist, but with an open hand. Not grasping desperately, but touching lightly. It's the difference between clinging and caring, between possessing and appreciating. Most of us go through life with our hands clenched tight around everything we value. Our relationships, our possessions, our ideas about how things should be, our plans for the future, our identity. We grip these things as if our lives depend on never letting go, and in this gripping we create tremendous suffering because life is change. Everything flows, nothing stays the same. The moment you grasp something tightly, trying to freeze it in place, its all relationship evolves, the possession wears out. The plan falls apart, your body ages. People leave. Nothing you can hold on to will stay exactly as it is. This doesn't mean you shouldn't care about things. Zen Buddhism isn't teaching indifference or coldness. It's teaching a different way of caring. A way that allows things to be what they are, to change as they must, without your attachment adding suffering to the natural flow of life. Think of holding a bird. If you grip it too tightly, you hurt it. You might even kill it. If you don't hold it at all, it flies away and you never experience its presence. But if you hold it gently with an open hand, it can rest there freely, and when it's time for it to fly, you can let it go without grief, knowing that its nature is to fly. This is how Zen teaching invites us to hold everything in life lightly, with appreciation rather than possession, with care rather than clinging, knowing that all things arise, stay for a time and pass away, and that our grasping doesn't change this. It only makes the passing more painful. There was a master named Soyen who lived in a small temple in a mountain valley. The temple was modest, just a few buildings arranged around a simple courtyard. He was known throughout the region for his simple way of living and his deep calm in the face of change. Students came to him to learn this quality of equanimity, this ability to meet both gain and loss with the same peaceful presence. Soen had very few possessions. His room held a sleeping mat, a few robes, some books, and little else. But among his few things, there was one item he used daily and treasured for its simple beauty. A tea bowl, pale blue, with a glaze that showed patterns like clouds drifting across a sky. He had received it 20 years earlier from his teacher, and he had used it every day since. The bowl fit perfectly in his hands. He knew every subtle variation in its surface, every small imperfection in the glaze. It had a small chip on the rim from years ago when he had bumped it against a pot. But the chip had become part of its character, part of its story. Each morning when he drank his tea, he held this bowl, feeling its familiar weight, seeing the steam rise from its rim. One morning, as Soyen was having tea in his small room, he heard a sound from the shelf where the bowl usually rested. He had set it there to dry after washing it. But the shelf, old wood that had warped slightly over the years, had shifted. The bowl rolled, tipped and fell to the floor. The sound of breaking was clear and final. The bowl shattered into many pieces. The beautiful glaze now in fragments scattered across the tatami mat. A student who was visiting, a young monk named Dyke, was in the hallway when he heard the sound. He rushed to the room and saw the broken bowl. His face showed immediate distress. He knew how much that bowl meant to Soyen, how many years the master had used it, how it had been a gift from his teacher. "Master, your tea bowl, the one from your teacher, the one you've used all these years, what a tragedy." His voice was thick with concern, but Soyen looked at the broken pieces with a calm face. No anger, no distress, no tightness around his eyes or mouth. He sat down the cup he was holding and knelt beside the fragments. He picked up a few pieces, examining them with gentle attention, turning them to catch the light. "It was a good bowl," he said quietly, his voice warm with appreciation. "It served well for many years. I enjoyed using it every day." "But aren't you upset? It was from your teacher." So looked up at the young monk. "I feel something, yes, a kind of softness in my chest, tenderness, appreciation for the bowl and its years of service, gratitude that I had it for so long, but upset, no. The bowl was always going to break eventually. All things break. This is their nature, but it was your favorite. You used it every single day. I've never seen you use a different bowl." "Yes, and because I used it every day, I appreciated it fully. I enjoyed it while it was whole. I noticed its beauty, its feel in my hands, the way tea tasted from it. I was present to it. Now it's broken. This is what happens to all things. Shall I add my suffering to the simple fact of the breaking?" Dyke sat down on the floor, his confusion evident on his face. "But surely you wish it hadn't broken. Surely you'd prefer it was still whole. Wishing it hadn't broken is wishing for the impossible. It has already broken. The breaking is done. My wishing doesn't unbreak it, and even if it hadn't broken today, it would have broken someday. Next year, 10 years from now, when I die, someone else would have inherited it and used it until it broke. All bowls break eventually. All things that arise also pass away. This bowl was no exception." So gathered the pieces carefully and placed them in a cloth. His movements were gentle, respectful. "I held this bowl lightly all the years I used it. I knew it was temporary, as all things are. So when it broke, I was ready, not because I expected it to break today, or even thought about it breaking, but because I understood its nature. Bowls break. This is not tragedy. This is just the way of things. The nature of form is to break down, to return to pieces. So you didn't really care about the bowl. You kept yourself distant from it." "I cared very much," Soyen said, and there was genuine feeling in his voice. "I appreciated its beauty every time I used it. I enjoyed the feel of it in my hands, the weight of it, the way the glaze caught the light differently at different times of day. I enjoyed the memories associated with it, remembering my teacher handing it to me, remembering the thousands of mornings I held it. But I didn't cling to it. I didn't need it to last forever for it to be valuable. Its temporary nature didn't diminish my appreciation. If anything, it enhanced it." He held up one of the larger pieces, turning it to catch the morning light that streamed through the window. The glaze showed a pattern like clouds, blue and white, swirling together in the way that had always reminded him of the sky over the mountains. "See how beautiful this glaze is. I can still appreciate this beauty, even though the bowl is broken. The beauty was never in the bowl staying perfect forever. The beauty was in the bowl itself, in each moment of its existence. That beauty was real and I experienced it fully. I didn't save my appreciation for some future time. I didn't take it for granted. I was present to it each day. Now the bowl is broken, but the appreciation I had for it, that was real too. That happened. Nothing can break that experience. Diki thought about this for a long time, watching a Soyan wrap the pieces carefully in the cloth. You're saying we should expect everything to break or end. Not expect in the sense of waiting for disaster or being pessimistic or never enjoying anything because we know it won't last, but understand, have clarity about the nature of things. Everything that arises also passes away. Cups break. Flowers wilt. Relationships change turn. This isn't pessimism. It's just seeing clearly. It's understanding the nature of reality. And when we see clearly, we can appreciate things while they're here, without clinging to them desperately, without demanding they be permanent. Doesn't that make life sad? Knowing everything will end. The opposite, Soyan said gently, and he smiled for the first time since the bowl broke. It makes life precious. If this bowl was going to last forever, would I have noticed it as carefully? Would I have appreciated each use? When we know something is temporary, we pay attention to it, we're present to it, we don't take it for granted. The flower is beautiful because it blooms and then fades. The sunset is precious because it only lasts a few minutes. The snow is magical because it melts. Life is meaningful because it's brief. If everything lasted forever, nothing would be special. He swept the remaining fragments into the cloth and stood up. This is what Zen Buddhism means by holding life lightly. Not caring less but clinging less. Not loving less but grasping less. Appreciating fully while present. Releasing gracefully when the time comes. The bowl served its purpose. It brought beauty and utility to my life for many years. Now it's broken. I'm grateful for what it gave, and I let it go without adding suffering to the simple fact of change. He paused, looking at the wrapped cloth in his hands. Tomorrow he'll use a different bowl. He'll appreciate that one too, for as long as it lasts. And when it breaks, as it will someday, he'll appreciate the time I had with it, and move on. This is how we can live fully present to what's here without clinging to keep it forever. This teaching about non-attachment runs through all of Zen Buddhism, like water through rock. We create so much suffering through our grasping. We want things to stay the way they are. We want people to remain unchanged. We want our plans to unfold exactly as we imagined. We want our lives to follow a certain path. And when things don't go this way, when change comes as it always does, we suffer. Not just from the change itself, but from our resistance to the change. We add layers of suffering on top of the natural difficulty of loss or transition. Each thought is a way of clinging to how things were or how we wanted them to be. And this clinging doesn't stop the change. It just makes us suffer more while the change happens anyway. In a coastal village, there was a merchant named Ichiro who made his living trading goods between communities. He would buy rice from farming villages in the inland valleys and sell it in fishing villages along the coast. He would buy fish and seaweed from coastal towns and sell them to farming communities that had no access to the sea. He traveled constantly, his cart loaded with goods, following the routes he had established over many years of patient work. He was successful and comfortable, not wealthy, but secure. He had regular customers who trusted him, who waited for his arrival each month. He knew the best routes through the mountains, the easiest river crossings, the quickest paths between villages. He knew the best prices, the best timing for different goods, the best ways to preserve things during transport. His business was stable and profitable. He had built a good life through years of careful attention and honest dealing. He had a wife and 3 children. They lived in a solid house with a good roof. There was always enough food. The children went to school. It wasn't a life of luxury, but it was a good life built through his steady work and the relationships he had cultivated over many years. One autumn, everything changed. A terrible storm came from the sea, larger and more powerful than any storm in living memory. The old people in the village had never seen anything like it. The wind tore roofs from houses, pulled trees up by their roots. The rain fell so heavily that rivers overflowed their banks, and new rivers formed where there had been only dry ground. But worst of all was the storm surge. The ocean rose and pushed far inland, farther than anyone thought possible. Theater flooded the low-lying farming valleys where Ichiro suppliers lived. The salt water destroyed crops and contaminated wells. Fields that had grown rice for generations became poisoned with salt. The farming villages where Ichiro had bought rice for years were devastated. Their autumn rice harvest, which should have been ready to sell, was ruined. Their fields were unusable. Their storage buildings were damaged or destroyed. They had nothing to sell. More than that, they needed help just to survive. The fishing villages were damaged too, though in different ways. Boats were smashed against rocks or sunk in the harbor. Fishing equipment was lost. Houses near the water were destroyed or damaged. The docks needed rebuilding. The normal patterns of life and trade that Ichiro depended on were completely disrupted. For several days after the storm, Ichiro just tried to help with the immediate crisis, searching for survivors, clearing debris, bringing water from uncontaminated wells. But as the emergency passed and people began to think about the future, he started to realize the full extent of what had changed. He stood beside his cart one morning, looking at his carefully organized goods. Rice that no one could afford to buy. Tools for farming communities that no longer had fields. His whole business was based on these trade routes, these relationships, these patterns that had seemed so stable. Without them, how would he make his living? He had a family to support. He had responsibilities. Everything he had built over years of patient work was collapsing. He felt despair rising in his chest, a heavy feeling that made it hard to breathe. He sat down on the cart step, his head in his hands. His wife found him there. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice thin with worry. "I don't know," he said. "Everything I built, it's all gone. We still have the cart, we still have each other. But the business, my roots, my suppliers, everything I worked for." She sat beside him. "Go talk to Master Hakuin. He might help you see clearly." So Ichiro went to visit the monk he knew, a man named Hakuin, who lived in a small temple at the edge of the village. The temple had been damaged in the storm, but Hakuin was there working to repair the roof. He climbed down from his ladder when he saw Ichiro approaching. "Master Hakuin," Ichiro said, slumping onto the temple steps. "The storm has destroyed everything. The farmers have no rice to sell. The fishermen have no boats to fish with. My trade routes are gone. My business is finished. I've lost everything I worked for. I don't know what to do." Hakuin sat down beside him. He picked up a cup of water he had been drinking and took a slow sip. "Your cart is still there," he observed calmly. "I can see it from here. You still have your health. Your family is safe. I spoke with your wife yesterday. The roads still exist, even if they need some repair. What have you actually lost? My business, my whole way of making a living, the entire structure of my life." Ikroltunk's voice rose with frustration. "Ah," Hakuin said, setting down his cup. "You've lost the particular way things were arranged. That's true, the specific pattern your life followed. But have you lost the ability to adapt? Have you lost your knowledge of trade, your understanding of what people need? Have you lost your relationships with people, the trust you built over years, or have you only lost your attachment to things staying exactly as they were?" Ichiro felt anger rising hot in his chest. "You don't understand. This isn't about attachment. This is about survival. How will I feed my family? How will I pay for my children's schooling? This isn't philosophical. This is real." "Not saying your concern isn't real," Hakuin said gently, his voice steady and calm. "The practical matters are important. asking whether your suffering is coming from the situation itself or from your insistence that the situation should be different than it is. The storm happened, the damage is done. These are facts. Can you work with what actually is, or will you spend your energy grieving for what was and wishing things were different? But I built this business over years. I had everything arranged perfectly. I knew exactly how to make it work, and now it's all destroyed, and that arrangement was always temporary. Hakuin said, "You just didn't know it. Everything we build is temporary. Houses stand until they fall. Businesses thrive until they don't. Health continues until it fails. Situations remain stable until they change. This is the nature of all conditioned things, all things that depend on circumstances. You didn't lose something eternal. You lost something that was always going to change eventually. The storm just made the change happen suddenly instead of gradually." Ichiro sat in silence, watching Hakuin sweep. The anger was still there, but something else was stirring underneath it. A recognition that the monk was pointing at something true. So, what should I do? Stop clinging to how things were and look at what's actually here now. The farmers need help rebuilding. The fishermen need new boats. Both communities need goods they can't produce themselves anymore. You have a cart. You have knowledge of trade. You have relationships in other regions that weren't affected by the storm. Can you see what's needed now instead of mourning what was needed before? Over the following days, Ichiro began to shift his perspective. Instead of focusing on his lost trade routes, he looked at what was actually needed. The farming villages needed salt-tolerant seeds to replant their fields. They needed tools to clear the debris. The fishing villages needed materials to rebuild boats. They needed supplies while they recovered. He used his cart and his knowledge to bring what was needed. It wasn't the same business he'd had before. The profit was smaller at first. The work was harder. But it was meaningful work and it was possible work. And gradually, as the communities recovered, new patterns of trade emerged. Different from before, but functional, alive. When he visited Hakuin again months later, his face was different. Less tight, more open. "You were right," he told the monk. "I was clinging to how things were. I couldn't see what was actually possible because I was too busy grieving what was lost. And now I understand what you meant about holding lightly. I still care about my work. I still care about my family's well-being. But I don't cling to any particular arrangement. I know everything can change, and when it does, I can work with the change instead of fighting it." This is what Zen Buddhism teaches. Hakuin said, "Hold everything lightly, appreciate fully but don't grasp, care deeply but don't cling. Then when change comes, as it always does, you can flow with it instead of breaking against it." This principle of holding lightly applies to everything in life. Not just material things or business arrangements, but relationships, ideas, identities, plans. Everything we think is solid is actually fluid. Everything we think is permanent is actually passing through. When we can hold this truth without despair, when we can appreciate the temporary nature of things without clinging to make them permanent, we find a different kind of peace. Not the peace of having everything under control, but the peace of flowing with what is. There was a gardener named Sato who tended the grounds of a large estate owned by a wealthy family. He had worked there for many years since he was a young man learning the craft. Now in his middle age, he had created beautiful arrangements of plants and stones throughout the property, carefully designing each section of the garden to show different qualities through the seasons. The estate grounds were extensive. There were formal gardens near the main house, with carefully pruned pines and arranged stones. There were vegetable gardens that supplied the household. There were paths that wound through bamboo groves and under maple trees. Sat knew every plant, every stone, every corner of the grounds. But he was particularly proud of one section, a wild flower meadow he had spent years establishing. It occupied a gentle slope on the south side of the estate, visible from the main house, but far enough away to feel wild and natural. He had created it from an area that had been unused, just rough grass and weeds. He had spent years establishing it, collecting seeds from the mountains during his rare days off, carefully choosing varieties that would bloom in sequence through spring and summer and into fall. Early spring brought tiny white flowers close to the ground. Then came yellow buttercups and blue lupines. Summer brought red poppies and purple ayers. Late summer showed goldenrod and black-eyed Susans. The meadow was a progression of color and texture, different flowers appearing as the season advanced, like a long poem being written across the months. It took patience to establish. Wildflower meadows can't be rushed. The first year, barely anything grew. The second year, a few patches showed promise. The third year, it began to look like a meadow. By the fifth year, it was glorious, and each year after that, it became more established, more diverse, more balanced. Visitors to the estate always commented on its beauty. They would stand at the edge of the meadow in summer, when dozens of species were blooming at once, and just absorbed the color and movement. Butterflies and bees moved through it constantly. Birds nested in the tall grasses. It was alive in a way that formal gardens couldn't match. S would walk through it regularly, not to work, but just to observe, to see what was blooming, what insects were present, how the ecosystem was developing. It felt less like something he had made, and more like something he had invited to exist, then stepped back to let it unfold. One spring morning, the estate owner called S to the main house. This was unusual. The owner rarely spoke to Sato directly, usually communicating through the house manager. "The meadow you created is beautiful," the owner said. "I've enjoyed watching it develop over the years. You've done excellent work." Sat bowed, pleased by the recognition. However, the owner continued, "I've decided to build a pond in that location. A large pond with a small island and a bridge. I've been planning this for some time. The work will begin next month. You'll need to clear the meadow to make space for the excavation." Sato felt his chest tighten. He bowed again, keeping his face neutral. "Yes, sir, I understand. I know you put considerable effort into that meadow," the owner said. "I appreciate your work, but I believe a pond in that location will be even more beautiful. You'll be in charge of designing the planting around it once it's complete." Sato bowed a third time and left. He walked back toward the meadow, his mind churning, years of work, his most beautiful creation. All the careful selection, the patient establishment, the watching and tending as it developed, gone, replaced with a pond. He felt anger rising. The owner didn't understand how much work had gone into the meadow, how carefully it had been designed, how perfectly balanced it had become. He felt grief welling up. The meadow would be destroyed, dug up, turned into a hole in the ground, and beneath the anger and grief there was resentment. His work wasn't valued. Years of effort dismissed for a new project. The owner thought a pond could just replace what had taken so long to create. He reached the meadow and stood at its edge. Early spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. In a few weeks, the whole meadow would be magnificent. The first wave of color spreading across the slope, and then it would be destroyed, every plant dug up, the soil disrupted, everything he had nurtured torn apart. As he stood there, his thoughts spiraling, a bee landed on a small flower near his foot. One of the earliest bloomers, a tiny blue flower that grew close to the ground. He watched the bee move from bloom to bloom, its legs thick with yellow pollen. It flew off to another patch of flowers. Then another, moving through the meadow with complete presence. The bee didn't know this meadow would soon be gone. It didn't know that in a month these flowers would be buried under piles of excavated earth. It was just fully present to the flowers that were here now. This bloom, this moment, this perfect spring morning. Something shifted in Sat as he watched the bee's complete presence to this moment, without any concern for the past or future. Just this flower, just this moment, nothing else. He realized he could spend the next month grieving what would be lost, making himself miserable before the meadow was even touched. He could be angry and resentful, carrying those feelings every day until the work began. Or he could appreciate the meadow fully while it was still here. Every flower, every bee, every breeze moving through the grasses, every morning walk, every evening observation. He chose appreciation. Each day he walked through the meadow with full attention, noticing everything, the particular yellow of the early buttercups, bright as small suns, the way the grasses bent in the wind, all moving together like water, the sound of insects, a constant hum in the warm afternoons, the smell of earth and growing things, rich and alive, the feeling of walking through something wild and beautiful that he had helped bring into existence. He didn't think about the coming destruction. When thoughts of the pond arose, he noticed them and returned to what was actually here now. The meadow as it was in this moment, not as it would be or wouldn't be, just as it was. The flowers progressed through their sequence. The early blues and whites gave way to yellow and purple. Each stage was complete in itself, perfect for its time. Sato was present to all of it, more present than he had been in years. The impending loss had paradoxically made him more attentive, more grateful for what was here while it lasted. When the workers came to clear the land, Sato was there. He helped them carefully, making sure to save seeds from his favorite plants. He collected them in cloth bags, labeled them, stored them carefully. He knew he could use them elsewhere. Create new gardens in different places, maybe a smaller wildflower area near the vegetable gardens. The particular meadow was ending, but what he had learned creating it could live on in other forms. As the pond began to take shape over the following months, Sat found himself becoming interested in it. Despite his initial resistance, what plants would grow well at its edges? How would the water reflect the sky and the surrounding trees? What possibilities did this new feature offer? What about water plants he had never worked with before? He realized he was holding his work lightly now, in a way he never had before with the meadow. He still cared deeply about the gardens. He still put his full attention and skill into every detail, but he wasn't clinging to any particular arrangement. Gardens changed, that was their nature. Plants grew and died. Designs evolved. The estate owner's preferences shifted. Nothing stayed the same. This lightness didn't make him care about her work. If anything, it made him more present, because he wasn't spending his energy trying to make things permanent, trying to freeze one beautiful moment into forever. He could fully appreciate each stage of the garden's life. Each season was complete in itself. Each garden was perfect for its time, even knowing that time would pass and things would change. This is what Zen Buddhism points to with its teaching about non-attachment. It's not about caring less or becoming cold or distant. It's about caring without clinging, appreciating without possessing, enjoying things fully while they're here, releasing them gracefully when they go. The master's broken tea bowl, the merchant's changed business, the gardener's cleared meadow. In each case, clinging would have created suffering on top of loss. But holding lightly allowed them to meet change with grace, to appreciate what was without demanding it stay forever, to flow with life instead of fighting it. When you relax your grip, something else relaxes too. The constant tension of trying to keep everything the same eases. The fear of loss softens because you're not fighting change anymore. You're allowing it, flowing with it, meeting each moment as it comes. Hold this moment lightly now. It's already passing. But that doesn't make it less precious. It makes it more so temporary, fleeting, and because of that, infinitely valuable. There's something in you that existed before your first thought. Something that was here before you learned your name, before you knew what words meant, before you formed any idea of who you are. Zen Buddhism calls this your original nature, your unborn mind, the awareness that's always been present. Most of us have completely forgotten this original nature. We've become so identified with our thoughts, our memories, our ideas about ourselves, that we think that's who we are. I am my thoughts. I am my history. I am the story I tell about myself. But Zen teaching points to something deeper, something that was here before all of that began. Think of a mirror. The mirror reflects everything that appears in front of it. Faces, objects, scenes. The reflections come and go, but the mirror itself doesn't change. It doesn't become the face it reflects. It doesn't hold on to the image after the face moves away. It just reflects clearly and completely without judgment or preference. Your original awareness is like this mirror. Thoughts appear in it, emotions arise in it, experiences happen in it, but the awareness itself isn't changed by what appears. It doesn't become the thought or the emotion or the experience. It simply knows them, the way a mirror simply reflects. This awareness is what you truly are beneath all the layers of identity and story and accumulated experience. It's been here your whole life, watching everything unfold. It was here when you were an infant before language. It's here now, reading these words. It will be here tomorrow. It doesn't age or change or need improvement. It's complete, exactly as it is. When you can recognize this awareness, even briefly, something fundamental shifts. You realize you're not your thoughts. You're the one who knows the thoughts. You're not your emotions. You're the space in which emotions arise and pass. You're not your life story. You're the awareness that witnessed that story unfold. This recognition brings a particular kind of freedom, because if you're not your thoughts, you don't need to believe every thought that arises. If you're not your emotions, you don't need to be controlled by every feeling. If you're not your story, you don't need to keep living according to a script written in the past. You can rest in the awareness itself, which is always fresh, always present, always free. In a village near a river, there lived a teacher named Eshun, who was known for her ability to point students directly to their original nature. She didn't use complicated explanations or lengthy discourses. She didn't give elaborate teachings that required years to understand. She had a simple, direct way of showing people what was already obvious, if only they would look in the right direction. Her room was modest, just a single space in a small house near the temple. She lived simply with few possessions, but people came to her from surrounding villages seeking understanding. One day a mother brought her young daughter to visit Ishon. The girl was perhaps 5 years old, with bright eyes and an open, curious face. She walked with the unself-conscious presence that young children have, not yet fully lost in thought, still partly inhabiting the immediate experience of being alive. The mother wanted her daughter to receive a blessing from the teacher, as was customary in that region. Parents brought their children to respected teachers, hoping some wisdom would be passed on, some protection offered. Essen invited them into her simple room. She welcomed them with a gentle bow. The girl looked around with interest, taking in everything: the clean tatami mats worn smooth by years of use, the small alcove with its hanging scroll showing a simple circle in black ink, the window that showed the garden outside, where bamboo moved in the morning breeze. "Come here, little one," Essen said gently, gesturing for the girl to sit beside her on a cushion. The girl came without hesitation and sat looking up at the teacher with complete attention. Her face showed no self-consciousness, no worry about doing the right thing, just pure presence. Essen picked up a small hand mirror that sat near her cushion. It was old and simple, the back made of polished wood that had darkened with age, the glass clear and clean despite its years. She held it carefully with obvious appreciation for this simple object. "Do you know what this is?" she asked the girl, her voice warm. "A mirror," the girl said immediately without hesitation. "Good. And what does a mirror do?" The girl thought for a moment, her face serious with consideration. "It shows you your face." "That's right. Let me show you something," Essen said. She held the mirror up so the girl could see her reflection clearly. Look, there you are. The girl looked at herself in the mirror, smiling at her own reflection. She made a face, watching it appear in the mirror. She laughed at herself. You see yourself, Essen said. Now watch carefully. She tilted the mirror slowly, so it no longer reflected the girl's face. Instead, it showed the window behind them and the garden beyond, the bamboo swaying gently. Now the mirror shows the garden. Where did your face go? The girl looked at the mirror showing the garden, then touched her own face with her hand. It went away, she said, slightly puzzled. Did it, or did the mirror just stop reflecting it? Is your face gone? The girl giggled. No, my face is still here. She touched her cheeks again. The mirror just isn't showing it anymore. Exactly, Essen said, pleased. She tilted the mirror again, and the girl's face reappeared in the glass. Your face came back, the girl said, delighted. The mirror is showing your face again, Ishan said. But think about this. The mirror itself hasn't changed at all. It showed your face, then it showed the garden. Now it shows your face again. But the mirror is still just the mirror, clear and still. It doesn't become what it reflects. It doesn't hold on to the images. It just reflects clearly, and simply whatever is in front of it. She set the mirror down gently on the mat and looked at the girl directly, her eyes kind but penetrating. You are like this mirror. Everything you see, everything you feel, everything you think, these are like reflections appearing in you. They come and go. Right now, you're happy, so happiness appears. Later you might be sad and sadness will appear. You see the garden and the image of the garden appears in you. You hear my voice and the sound appears in you. But you, the one who is aware of all these things, you don't change. You're always here, always watching, always knowing what's appearing. Just like the mirror is always there. Whether it's reflecting a face or a garden or an empty room, the girl was quiet. Her young face showing a kind of recognition, as if something obvious but forgotten had just been pointed out. She looked at the mirror, then at her mother, then back at Ekon. Before you knew words, Essen continued softly. Before you learned your name, before you knew you were a girl, or that this was your mother, or that the world had all these names and ideas about things, you were already aware, already looking, already here. You looked at your mother's face when you were a baby before you knew the word mother. You heard sounds before you knew the word sound. That awareness hasn't changed. It's the same now as it was then. And it will be the same when you're old like me. It doesn't grow up or grow old or change in any way. It just is always here, always clear, like this mirror. The mother, sitting slightly behind her daughter, felt something shift in her own understanding as she listened. She had brought her daughter for a simple blessing, perhaps expecting some words of protection or wisdom for the child's future. But Eschen was offering something much deeper, something the mother herself needed to hear. Is this what Zen Buddhism teaches? The mother asked quietly, that we are awareness rather than what we're aware of. Yes, Ishun said, turning her attention to the mother while keeping the girl close. Most people live their whole lives thinking they are their thoughts, their feelings, their circumstances, their personal history. They suffer tremendously because they identify completely with what passes through awareness. They think I am angry when actually there is just anger appearing in awareness. They think I am this story when actually there is just a story being witnessed by awareness. They think I am this limited person when actually they are the unlimited awareness in which the person appears. She picked up the mirror again, holding it between them. When you recognize yourself as the awareness rather than the content of awareness, suffering decreases naturally. Not because you make yourself better or fix all your problems, but because you see that you are not actually damaged by what passes through you. The mirror isn't damaged by reflecting a sad face. It just reflects it clearly without becoming sad itself. How does one practice this recognition? By noticing throughout the day. Notice that you are the one who is aware. You see this, you hear that. You think this thought, you feel this feeling, but who is the you that's aware of all these things? Not your name, not your story, not your idea of yourself. The actual awareness itself. That's your original nature. That's what you were, before you became this person with this name and this history. And it's what you still are right now, underneath all the accumulated layers. The girl spoke up like the mirror is still a mirror, even when it shows different things. Exactly like that. Eshan smiled. You understand perfectly. After they left, Essen sat quietly looking at the mirror in her hand. She thought about how children often grasp these truths more easily than adults. They haven't yet fully identified with their thoughts and stories. They are still close to their original nature, still living partly from that space of simple awareness. Adults have to work to find their way back to what children still partly inhabit. Back to the awareness that was here before all the complications began. Back to the unborn mind, the mind that existed before birth and will exist after death. The awareness that's not created and cannot be destroyed. This teaching about original nature is at the very heart of Zen Buddhism. Everything else flows from this recognition. When you know yourself as awareness rather than as the contents of awareness, everything changes. Not because you become someone different, but because you recognize what you've always been. Your thoughts become less solid. They are just thoughts passing through. Your emotions become less overwhelming. They are just weather moving through the sky of awareness. Your whole life story becomes less binding. It's just a story being witnessed, not the final truth of who you are. As our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism comes to its gentle close, you've traveled far tonight, not in distance, but in understanding. You've touched something simple and profound that's been waiting here all along beneath the surface of your daily thoughts. The teachings you've heard tonight aren't new ideas to add to your collection. They're not practices to master or goals to achieve. They're more like reminders of what you already know deep down. Invitations to see what's always been here, just waiting for you to notice. You don't need to hold on to anything you've heard. You don't need to remember the details or work to apply the lessons. Like rain falling on soil, these teachings will settle where they need to go. Some will take root immediately. Others will wait until the right season comes. Trust that what's meant for you will find its way without your effort. All the concerns of the day can rest now. All the plans for tomorrow can wait until tomorrow comes. Right now, in this moment, nothing needs your attention. Nothing requires solving. Nothing demands understanding. You can simply be here, breathing alive, held by this moment exactly as it is. Let your breathing slow completely. Now feel yourself sinking deeper into whatever supports you. Notice how your body knows exactly how to rest. When you stop trying to control the process, your breath finds its own rhythm. Your muscles release their tension. Your mind settles like dust settling in water. When the stirring stops, you can let go of being anyone in particular. Let go of maintaining any image or identity. Let go of all the roles you play during the day. For these hours of rest, you can simply be the awareness that witnesses all experience, the stillness that holds all movement, the silence that makes all sound possible. Zen Buddhism has shown you that peace isn't something you must create or achieve. It's what remains when you stop disturbing it, when the constant doing quiets, when the endless thinking settles, when the grasping relaxes. Peace is what's already here, what's always been here, just waiting for you to stop long enough to notice. Your breath continues on its own without your management. Your heart beats without your conscious effort. Your body knows how to heal and restore itself while you sleep. All the processes that keep you alive continue without your thinking mind directing them. You can trust this wisdom. That's deeper than thought, older than your conscious mind, more reliable than any plan you could make. Let yourself release completely. Now release any remaining tension in your body, any lingering thoughts in your mind. Release the need to understand or accomplish or become anything at all. Release even the effort to release. Just allow everything to settle naturally, the way a bird settles into its nest at day's end. The peace you've touched tonight isn't something you achieved through effort. It's something you uncovered by removing what obscured it. This peace is always here, always available, always ready to welcome you home whenever you remember to stop running and simply be still. May your sleep tonight be deep and restorative. May you rest in the simple truth that you are exactly where you need to be, exactly as you are. May you release all burden and know that this release is not weakness but wisdom. May you wake refreshed, carrying perhaps just a whisper of what you've touched here. A quiet knowing that peace is never far away. The wisdom of Zen Buddhism isn't complicated. It's the simplest thing in the world, just this breath, just this moment, just this presence, nothing to add, nothing to take away. Everything already complete exactly as it is. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at